Welcome to the Maximize Business Value podcast, brought to you by Mastery Partners, where our mission is to equip business owners like you to maximize your business value and achieve the exit of your dreams, whatever that means to you. With insights gained from over 100 business transactions, we share real-world strategies, lessons, and expert advice to help you build long-term, sustainable value in your business. Each episode is hosted by one of our Mastery certified partners. They're seasoned experts who've helped countless business owners navigate the complexities of growth, scaling, and building value. They bring first-hand experience, actionable insights, and a passion for helping you build a business that thrives. So let's dive in.
Hi, this is Terry Chevalier, and welcome to Maximize Business Value, a podcast for business leaders who are passionate about building long-term sustainable value in their business. I'm really excited today because I get to have one of my friends on. I'm excited to introduce you to Dee Herman. Dee is a partner with Herman & Whitaker, his own law firm out in DC, and he is a telecommunications and technology law firm. Dee, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Terry. It's great to be here.
Well, great to have you here. You know, you and I have known each other for a while, but our podcast listeners don't. So maybe could you take a second to talk a little bit about your background and how you came to specialize in this particular niche?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we are a telecommunications law firm, as you mentioned. Our clients are primarily rural service providers, broadband service providers around the entire United States, as well as other technology companies, startups, wireless ISPs, mobile cell phone providers, and cable companies. So anything that sort of touches the communications or telecommunications space and touches the FCC and touches more than likely Capitol Hill, which almost everything does these days, we have a hand in it, whether that's transactionally, whether that's regulatory stuff, or anything in between.
Wow, that's quite a bit. That's quite a bit, and that's really a very unique niche that you're fitting in there. And so, help us understand what are some of those legal services that you're providing. And a lot of listeners are probably very familiar with the idea of having a general counsel, but what are the things that you're doing almost as a general counsel, but also what are those additional services that you're providing?
Well, so it is interesting. I mean, there's been lots of, and I know we'll talk about this later in the podcast, but there's been a lot of transactions happening in the communication space in general, in the telecom space, in the wireless space. So that's one thing. And there's also, we're living in a world of regulation. And whenever there's an administration change, the regulations either, come or go, and come and go at the same time, depending on the party. And there's lots going on there. There's lots going on Capitol Hill regarding all sorts of funding mechanisms for rural carriers, privacy laws, lots of different things that are happening there. So those are the sort of the services that we provide to our clients, which is, just about anything that touches the space. And to your point about general counsel, we also have clients who are, in small areas of the country, and they ask us to do more general counsel type work, not necessarily local stuff, but stuff that a lawyer would do.
Well, and since you are a lawyer, that is kind of the stuff you wanted to do.
Right.
So you kind of opened the gates a little bit on this point. It's April 2025. We've got all kinds of things going on. We've got tariffs, we've got interest rates, we've got all these other things. But let's talk about what are some of those challenges that you're seeing in the industry right now, for your clients. There's a lot of things that are going on out there, but really specifically, what are you seeing that's very common? What's everybody really dealing with?
Well, there's a couple of things, and the tariffs. One of them is, I think, is the verdict is not in on that. Will cost of bringing in materials to build fiber, to build infrastructure, the price of steel, the price of equipment, is that going to increase dramatically? Is that going to affect the bottom line of lots of our clients? I don't think we know the answer to that yet. At the same time, a very large number of our clients are federally supported by something called the Universal Service Fund. The Universal Service Fund is a fee that everybody, if you have a phone, you have a cell phone, or you have a broadband connection, and you live in a city or an urban area, you're probably paying into the Universal Service Fund. And that's been under attack really by the courts And the Supreme Court just recently heard a case whether essentially the Universal Service Fund is even constitutional. So you've got funding mechanisms here. You've also have a almost $43 billion programs happening right now in the Department of Commerce about trying to get broadband out to every individual who doesn't have broadband and meaningful broadband service at specific speeds. And that's also going through a major amount of change right now. I think we're seeing lots of change. And I obviously, this is true in every industry. I think the change that we're seeing sort of globally here in the United States is unprecedented, at least in the last century. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out.
That's a really good point. So a lot of things we work with our clients, when we conduct our transition readiness assessment, I mean, we're looking at the business and how sustainable is it to shock and risk and things like that. We're looking at, you mentioned like tariffs. So do you have alternative suppliers? Do you have sources, not just within or outside the U.S., but also within the U.S. For things? For example, working with a manufacturing client, he had been receiving a lot of his materials from overseas. So now he's looking at U.S. based suppliers and how does that impact his business? So very much a really challenging time. Well, so look, how do you approach that? So, when clients come to you and they say, hey, I've got these kinds of issues, I mean, how do you go about addressing those? And are there ways to turn any of that into actually driving value back into the business?
Yeah, that's a great question, Terry. Look, every time a client calls us, it's something more than likely unique. I mean, whether it's they're looking to acquire, they're looking to sell, they've got a problem, a regulatory problem. They may have not understood some of the rules from the FCC. Maybe they did, but they don't like the rules of the FCC. And so what we normally do is go through with them, and then we figure out the best way to approach it. Lots of times that is talking with the regulators. Lots of times it's talking with people on the Hill. Lots of times it's talking with local counsel or other people who are maybe part of a transaction and figuring out, what the best path is. Terry, lots of times it's talking to people like you, who come from a very different place, and add value that way. I mean, as lawyers, we like to think we add value. We certainly charge enough to add value, unfortunately, but we also know, or hopefully know enough to bring in experts that are in the financial world, that are sort of in if they need it, in the marketing world, in succession planning world, all those kinds of things to assist the clients in trying to accomplish whatever their goal is.
No, that's a great point. And we see certainly our clients, they need a good attorney. I mean, we've always, in fact, going back to this TRA, I mean, one of the things we ask is, how would you describe your legal support? Is it sort of reactionary, or is it somebody who's actually with you and kind of helping you in that process? Because it to your point, we think good legal advice is actually a big point to drive value. I mean, kind of to this point, and again, it's one of the things I was really excited to bring you on is we have clients across a variety of industries, not just telecom, but telecom is very heavily regulated, and there's other industries that are just as heavily regulated. You take healthcare, with all the things they deal with HIPAA compliance and oversight from HHS, or financial services. My goodness, I thought telecom was heavily regulated until I saw how much the SEC gets involved in anything dealing with banks and financial services. So if I think about it, how important is this issue of regulatory compliance when it comes to, mergers and acquisitions, and how does it affect deal value and deal likelihood and those kinds of factors?
Great question. So the regulated space is really is a tough one. And to your point, it goes across all these industries. So what we're seeing right now in the federal government, of course, is major cuts in lots of agencies that do the regulating. And not only that, we've seen executive orders come out from the administration. And this is, by the way, I have no political view on this. I mean, if you want to know what it is, but I don't think you do. But the larger point here is that you're seeing lots of, so the executive orders, for example, are saying, hey, for every one regulation that you enact, we want you to take away 3 regulations that you don't need. If there's a regulation that's going to have a major impact, for example, on the costs to any company, we, the executive branch, want to have oversight over that. And so the period of flux right now is really, really tough in terms of navigating, number one, where is the regulation going? Two, where are the people who work in the federal government going? Are they going to stay? Are they leaving? We've seen a lot of regulators leave. And then three, more importantly, and I think this is an open question right now, is sort of what is the role of Congress in all this? Right now, Congress is sort of hanging back and sort of seeing what happens. We're still in the first 100 days of the administration. So what is is Congress going to sort of step up and say, hey, we needed to we want these agencies to do X, and we need a direct mandate from Congress to do that, or are they going to rely more on the executive branch and the courts to figure all that out? So it is with all these regulated industries, it is really a time right now to be proactive, but also I think if you become reactive in that sense, it's going to be very difficult to keep up.
That's a great point. I mean, how, I can't even imagine if you're an owner in one of these regulated industries and you're saying, okay, we're getting a new regulation, but I'm losing, three others, trying to keep up.
Right.
I mean, that's got to be really challenging for people to try to do that, without any sort of advice.
It is. I mean, the FCC, for example, this as an example, has a ongoing proceeding that they've called delete, delete, delete. And it's essentially trying to get rid of, unneeded regulations. And look, there are a lot of regulations that probably aren't necessary anymore, that are outdated. There are regulations that hurt companies like our clients, our small clients, because, they have to jump through lots of hoops that are expensive. They sometimes need a consultant, they need a lawyer, they don't want to have to do all those kinds of things. So the FCC, as they go in all these agencies now, as they undertake, how do we navigate through these regulations? It's going to have major changes. Our concern for our particular clients in some cases, though, is that in some cases, the less regulation there is, it may be good for smaller companies. It also may be a vehicle for larger companies or other companies that may not have the best interests of the industry at heart to sort of run roughshod over the industry.
Right. Yeah. And that dynamic, if you are a small business owner trying to compete against, a lot of these big companies, I mean, they deal with this all the time. And again, that's across industry. So yeah, it does seem like there's a lot of changes out there. Well, look, kind of speaking of just, the mergers and acquisitions activity, what are some of the trends you're seeing in telecom and tech sectors when it comes to transactions themselves? Or is there anything sort of, you mentioned before you're seeing some, so what's going on out there?
Well, so there's obviously still major consolidation that's happening with the largest companies. Obviously, you're seeing U.S. Cellular sell off its assets, T-Mobile and some to Verizon. You're seeing T-Mobile engage in lots of acquisition of spectrum, for example. On the broadband, especially on the fiber broadband side, we're also seeing a lot of more strategic acquisitions in areas that are adjacent to broadband companies and where they are now. And again, when I say broadband companies, a lot of these companies, a lot of our clients used to be and still are a provider of voice service, but they are incumbent telephone companies in very specific areas. And as they look now to sort of grow their business, they're looking at very strategic acquisitions in places where if there's something they can buy that they don't have to build themselves, and even better, borrow money or use federal money to do it, they're gonna go out and do that. So we're seeing a lot of transactions, and I would say, particularly on the buy side and not as much on the sell side. Meaning our clients who are smaller companies are really going out and buying assets that maybe a larger company has that they don't want or doesn't make sense for them strategically.
That's a great point, and I think that's a great strategy for a lot of business owners. Is if you've built this position, you don't necessarily have to build value to sell. You can build value in your business, which opens up these options of acquisitions you're saying. So I think that's a great example. Maybe there's something that somebody else doesn't want, but is strategically value for you, gives you access to a new market, gives you access to a new set of customers. So that's really interesting. When you think about, let's just kind of take this point of an M&A deal, and thinking about the legal issues. When we work with clients, a lot of times we're looking at what are all the potential legal issues that we would need to be aware of if you were trying to do a transaction. So what does that look like in your space? So what are those sort of things that you look at when you first go through?
It's funny because lawyers are, obviously notorious for over lawyering, right? I mean, the client will call and say, all right, we want to make this acquisition, and we just don't want anything to go wrong, and we want to make sure that we're going to pay X millions of dollars for it, and we want to make sure at the end of this it goes through, right? So that's the first thing, and then they say, okay, now we don't want you to over lawyer this, right? I'm like, well, okay, you can't do it both ways. You can either say, well, we want to make sure you're protected, but we obviously don't want to, depending on the size of the deal and what the deal is and who they're working with, you don't want it to be a mountain of pages that end up being unnecessary. So there is a fine line there. I would say that mostly with these transactions, what we're looking at is what's there. We do a lot of the work on the diligence, obviously, to make sure that whatever is there is actually there. And lots of times, if you're buying an older company or an older system, you're not necessarily going to know, and the people who are selling it may not even know exactly what they have. So there's a little bit of a leap of faith there. There's some business decisions that have to be made, there. From a legal perspective, too, the larger things are reps and warranties in these transactions, because you just don't want to get into a situation where once you buy something, you don't know what you have, and they didn't tell you at least, oh, no, this is what we think it is. And then the third part, Terry, is really the regulatory side and getting it through. Is this a transaction that is going to pass the muster at the FCC? Is it a transaction that has to go through the Department of Justice? Are there foreign ownership concerns? And those kinds of things are happening. One thing we've seen recently at the FCC is this idea that, hey, if you are doing business with a company and they have a very large or any DEI program, the new chairman of the FCC has essentially said, we're going to not allow transactions to go through for, if there's DEI involved. That's their prerogative. They can do that. I guess legally they can do that. But the same would be true for anything. And I think as we see the government sort of change and we're seeing, new people get into different positions in the government, there's going to be other conditions that are going to be put on lots of these transactions. And the question is going to be how are they going to look? How do we deal with it? And then, is that something that you can live with as a buyer or a seller?
Yeah, I know. I think that's a really good point, and I think a lot of people, when you're thinking about transaction, you're not thinking about, hey, is there some sort of government approval, some sort of government position on it? I mean, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, if you take, for example, federal money, the government could have a lien on some of the assets that you have, and they could be party to the transaction.
That's correct. And look, if you take federal money, in some cases, you're going to be subject to a higher level of scrutiny, not only sort of on the backside of the accounting and how that accounting is going to work, but if you've got a loan with the federal government, if you've got a loan or a loan with a bank, those questions always come into play about how do we transfer this? Who has a lien? Who has a title on these assets? What do we have to do to get rid of those? Are those things going to get paid off? We've seen a lot of transactions recently with small business loans. And the question is, okay, well, look, these small business loans lots of times have a rider in them that, hey, you can't sell. And if you do sell, you got to go to the SBA and get approval, or you pay it off. Right. So then there's a question that comes up about, well, how do you pay it off? If I'm in a $10 million deal, I owe $3 million to the SBA. How do I pay that off before I get my money? Right. So there's lots of those kinds of nuances. And there's so much money since the pandemic, either that's been borrowed or granted to providers, not only in the telecom space, but in lots of space. And the question is, how do those interact and play out with regard to the transaction and any kind of other regulatory approval you may need?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, deal terms, that's probably one of the things. Everybody gets focused on the deal in terms of like, what's the price, but no one pays attention to the terms. The terms are what really drive your value. Are you going to get paid, or you're not going to get paid? When are you going to get paid? One of the things, we've seen a lot more of earnouts, and earnout for listeners is if, the buyer thinks there's some risk in the business and says, look, I'm going to hold back a portion of that amount that I'm going to pay you, subject to you meeting some sort of milestones. And by the way, I'm taking control of your business, so you may not have as much control. to meet those milestones. So it's a lot bigger risk out there. So terms and having a good attorney really makes a big difference in getting the right terms in place.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think part of the other part, Terry, is that, that we're seeing a lot of deals that are sort of being financed now, and not financed necessarily through a bank, but being, self-financed, where the terms are, we're going to pay you X amount over 4 years. And those are where it gets really tricky too, because you obviously in that situation have to make sure that the deal's right, and that you've got all the other legal documents in place that you to make sure you're actually going to get your money. It's one thing to close on a transaction and get the first payment, but you get to year 3 and you're not getting your money anymore. Sure, you might get the business back, but what state is the business going to be in at that point?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. As you look, as you kind of think about this, stepping back, and again, this is around, how do we maximize value? So what kind of strategies do you think companies who are looking to either sell or expand through acquisitions, how can they actually position themselves to drive the best value that they can, best terms, in any sort of exit?
I think it always starts with the plan, right? What is the plan? And that's, we even do that obviously at our firm, and it's not always easy, right? But it is, okay, what are we going to be doing a year from now? Who are we going to be serving a year from now? What are our clients going to look like a year from now? What's our customer base in this area going to look like? Is there an economic growth here, or is there major economic hardship in a place where, expanding doesn't really do any good? So number one would be, what is the plan? And then number two is, how do we execute that plan, either by selling assets or buying assets, and can we afford to do that? And that's always the case. I think I think we're going to see in all industries, certainly for a lot of rural broadband providers, a significant amount of consolidation. And we've been saying this for years and years and years. It hasn't come about quite yet. And one of the reasons it hasn't come about is partly the Universal Service Fund, partly the BEAD funding, partly the grants and the other loan programs that have been made available by the federal government. But at some point, when these networks are built, then the question is, what do you do with a mature network? How do you continue to run it? Do you grow? Do you not? What is that plan? And I think that lots of times for smaller companies, figuring out what that plan is, it seems obvious, but it really isn't. It really is very difficult to do. Not that you're necessarily going to call a lawyer. They're going to call somebody like you and say, okay, look, this is where we want to be. But I would imagine that you get lots of calls about, hey, we don't even really know where we want to be. We just know we need to do something, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think well, yeah, thanks. To that point, I agree. I mean, we obviously see a lot of situations where people, let's take your example. You're seeing a big industry trend of consolidation. Well, that's not limited to telecom. A listener may be in an industry that is seeing a level of consolidation. So how do you position yourself? What do you want out of this? And so understanding where you want to go is incredibly important to that, but not just where you want as a business, but what do you personally want? And what does that look like for you? What does that look like for your family? What does that look like for your employees? Because if you can actually get a good picture of that, and then really understand where you are, such as we do through our transition readiness assessment, then you can actually craft a plan that's going to get you there, and bringing in, attorneys and CPAs and the team that you're going to need around you in order to make that happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we had a client recently who just acquired a few non-regulated businesses. And what they did was they looked in the market and they said, hey, there are 4 or 5 of these providers here that do the sort of the same thing with offering services in the area. And we think if we could consolidate those and we could run it, within our county and within our 2 or 3 county area, it makes more sense. So in that case, it's a win-win. These are businesses that are being run by maybe, families that were older. There's no succession plan. And it made sense for us for our client to go in and say, okay, look, we want to buy you all. We want you to still work for the company for a period of time. We're going to merge all these companies together. And eventually we're going to take over this as a service, because it's a service that's really critical to our business, even though it's not exactly a competitor in our business. They're not. Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting point. And I think that underscores again the importance. One of the things I hear a lot about these days is, you mentioned succession plan. I'm hearing a lot of need for succession planning. That we've got an aging both in terms of our workforce as well as our ownership structure. And again, this is a very common theme. If you're a boomer, you're trying to think about, what is that next thing look like? And so having a clear succession plan actually is a big way to drive value, because as you're noting, if you're a buyer and you come into a business, you want to know there's a succession plan so that if that owner disappears after the transaction's over, the business is still going to run. So if you have a succession plan, that's actually a detriment to creating value.
That's really interesting. That's a really good point. It's a really good point.
Well,
Terry, I'm learning from you on this podcast.
Thanks, Dee. Well, look, I mean, with that, so I've got one last question, and we've said it before, so this podcast is all about maximizing business value, and we ask this to all of our podcast guests. So what's the one most important thing you recommend business owners do to build value in their business?
I think the most important thing, I'll try to give you a very short answer on this. The most important thing is understanding what you do and staying in your lane to do it, right? So in some cases, for lawyers, we like to be trusted advisors, right? We could be everything to all people. If someone called and said, hey, I'm looking to import plastics, can you help me? That's not what we do, right? We don't do that. We could find somebody who does. But knowing what you do and focusing on that and being that trusted advisor to your clients or to your customers and doing it well and building the trust there is really the thing that in my opinion, brings real value to the business.
That's a great point. Yeah. And so I love that, having clarity around sort of what makes you unique and what's your unique selling position and who are you targeting and what the product is. I think that's a great point. Well, Dee, thank you so much. Thanks for sharing your insights and experiences with us today. This is the Maximize Business Value podcast, where we give practical advice to business owners on how to build long-term sustainable value in your business. Be sure to tune in each week and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss a single episode. See you next week.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Maximize Business Value podcast. I hope today's conversation sparked new ideas on how you can continue driving value in your business. But remember, it's not just about listening. It's about taking massive action. Visit our website, masterypartners.com, for more resources. Grab a copy of any of the books in the Maximize Business Value series on Amazon or via the links below. And don't hesitate to reach out if you want to know how to apply these concepts to your business. So until next time, I'm Tom Bronson, reminding you to relentlessly execute while you maximize business value.